Why the term self-sabotage is half-baked. I want to talk about an anonymized client named, again, this is a pseudonym, but named John. And John came into my office, virtual office these days, saying that he couldn't stop getting out of his own way in his life. He cited instances where he'd worked extremely hard at work, and after getting a promotion, he would then find himself incapacitated. So he'd get anxious at responding to kind of very simple emails. He'd find himself tongue-tied in important meetings, and he'd find it very difficult to concentrate just at his desk, kind of doing the work he was assigned to do. And he said something like, "I'm always doing this. I'm just too messed up to be able to get out of my own way. That all I know how to do is sabotage myself." Well, as I listened to John, I noticed kind of two tracks running kind of in my mind. First, he possessed a lot of insight into this sequence of kind of working from behind, as it were, then achieving success, like in the form of a promotion, and then finding it very difficult to maintain that success in the ways he mentioned. But secondly, he was relentlessly critical of himself for this pattern that he noticed. And, often in sessions when an insight like this is accompanied with harsh self-criticism, then I think both kind of warrant therapeutic attention. And John seemed to be using the term self-sabotage as somewhat insightful, but also as almost a weapon against himself to shed light on what was supposedly wrong with him. And in contrast, I found myself thinking about what dangers, emotional or psychological dangers, he may have actually astutely learned to avoid by thwarting his own success or prowess in the world. Well, in today's video, I want to discuss this internal logic of self-sabotage for the person who is put into a position where the strategy of self-sabotage is required. And I hope to show that children with psychologically or emotionally compromised parents can have their own success constitute an actual threat to their relationship with these types of parents. And finally, I'll argue why self-sabotage is not just about oneself, but I think is actually, or can be thought of as, a valiant attempt to contort oneself into a state that will be more acceptable and hopefully therefore more lovable to a psychologically or emotionally compromised parent. So I think it's very important to tune in to that interpersonal kind of objective of self-sabotage so that you and your clients can get to develop a compassionate kind of attitude towards their motive for adopting this strategy and recognize, I think, more, the dire circumstances they may have faced earlier in life which necessitated adopting something along the lines of self-sabotage. Well, my name is Jay Reid, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in San Francisco, California, and I specialize in helping people recover from narcissistic abuse by a parent or a partner, specifically addressing the kinds of beliefs that are called pathogenic beliefs in control mastery theory that one often has to adopt in order to survive living with and being close to a narcissistic parent or partner. Speaking of control mastery theory, which sort of this channel is all about, I highly encourage you to check out our free ebook on how basically control mastery theory works. It has several seminal articles on how the theory works, an overview of it, and some really great case examples of how you can apply it in your own work with your clients. Self-sabotage often indicates early attachment problems or traumas. John Bowlby, as many people are familiar with, kind of, elaborated, I think, this really useful theory called attachment theory, where he identified that children have a basic need to find an experience of felt security with their parents or primary caregivers. And in good enough parents and good enough parent-child relationships, the child can take the parent's interests, safety, and support for granted as the child explores their own world and develops their own kind of motives and aims. And that generally, when they pursue those aims, their relationship to their parent feels enhanced based on that parent's responsiveness to the child. In other unfortunate cases, if the parent is, again, psychologically or emotionally compromised in one way or another, then that parent may react very differently when the child tries to pursue their own aims in life. So a parent with an unstable sense of identity could feel abandoned by a young child kind of getting immersed in something that the child's interested in. Or a narcissistic parent could easily feel wounded. Their self-esteem could feel wounded by, say, an adolescent child going out to meet their friends and maybe becoming really good in a sport that they've taken up. And a depressive parent might grow more despondent at the child succeeding in his or her own life. And so in these cases, the child is faced with a real dilemma. Either pursue their own aims and successes in life and lose a needed connection to the parent, or find a way to thwart or sabotage, as it were, their own aims and patch together a sort of semblance of connection to the parent. I mean, I think of this as kind of like getting water from a stone, but it's a lot better than dying of thirst. And really, this isn't much of a choice, this dilemma. Kids almost universally will need to pick the latter option of doing something to thwart their own prowess in the world in order to make themselves more available, amenable, acceptable for their parents to kind of attach to them. And this is where a pathogenic belief comes in. And as in control mastery theory, it's sort of all about understanding what a client's trying to achieve in therapy and understanding what pathogenic beliefs they may hold, which are currently in the way of those pathogenic beliefs. And I'd just like to kind of take a brief digression to kind of emphasize what the term pathogenic actually means. I think of it as solving one important problem, usually in the domain of attachment for a child earlier in life, but then setting that child up for suffering much later in life and outside of the context of their relationship to that parent. And why is this so? Well, for a belief to be pathogenic, it necessarily has to involve surrendering an important developmental goal. And really the kind of developmental goal we're talking about today with the concept of self-sabotage is having to give up the developmental goal of self-efficacy. And lots of folks have cited self-efficacy as kind of a primary motivational system we have to kind of master things that we seem to be drawn towards. That's kind of an innate kind of human propensity. But that innate human propensity is kind of at odds with having another very important innate human propensity, which is to have felt security with our primary caregiver. And so when they're in conflict, the thing that's going to give is something that just pertains to the kid, which, in this case would be self-efficacy. So, for example, a pathogenic belief that could yield kind of experiences of self-sabotage to someone like John I mentioned earlier in the video would be, if I succeed, then I will make others feel diminished. Holding this type of pathogenic belief, let's say if John had a very easily wounded narcissistic parent, might have kept him more in the good graces of that parent. But as John can obviously attest now, it set him up for a lot of frustration and distress later in life and in other contexts outside of, say, his potential narcissistic parent. And I think that's the important thing to keep in mind when identifying your client's pathogenic beliefs. It is that it's a belief that started out as an attempt to likely mend an attachment bond threatened by the client's pursuit of an important developmental goal. But the persistence of that belief generates, and I think the genic part of pathogenic belief is because there's a generating or a generative aspect to the suffering that gets created by virtue of having to hold a belief such as the one I just described. As a colleague in the kind of control mastery circle named David Keeley put it, pathogenic beliefs have causes, like in the case of John, let's say a narcissistic parent easily wounded by his success. That pathogenic beliefs also have consequences, and that was illustrated by John's experience at his job after getting the promotion and feeling so stymied or, kind of in his own way and beset by anxiety and trying to kind of continue that success. How to effectively work with clients who self-sabotage in their lives today. Well, I think clients who find it very difficult or psychologically dangerous to succeed or sustain success in their lives typically come by this honestly. And I've found in my experience that effective therapy involves at least two ingredients. One is cultivating an attitude of kind of curiosity of like, that's interesting. Like in the case of, say, John, something like, as John's stating how anxious he gets, in his attempt to work after the promotion, I might say something like, it's interesting, John, because from a different vantage point, it's very unlikely that your skill set has diminished from, how things were before the promotion to now. So it kind of makes me wonder, like, what do you think may have changed between, prior to the promotion and after having received the promotion that might be contributing to some of your anxiety here? Can you kind of tell me about what your experience is now and maybe contrast that with what it kind of felt like before? And, well, in the case of John, he might say something like, well, before I felt like I was, playing from behind. I was worried about getting fired if I didn't do a great job. And then after I got the promotion, I don't know, it just felt like I had everything to lose and that I wasn't up to the task. Like my instincts would be wrong, and if I just responded to an email, the person would be offended by it, and so forth. Generating this kind of information in the therapy is very useful because it can help you and a client like John begin to think too historically in his life what kinds of experiences may have made momentum, like in the form of a promotion, feel like something to be avoided or something even dangerous. And what happened in the case with John, he in fact did have a narcissistic father who was easily threatened by John's successes in the world. And as a result, John had to be very careful to mute his successes, which, he was a talented guy. So it required a lot of kind of active acts of sort of self-sabotage, not necessarily consciously, but nonetheless, he had to exert energies to kind of trip himself up in order to keep himself in order to not be seen as the enemy in the eyes of his father, which was a grave, trauma he endured. And his actual pathogenic belief of if I succeed, then others will feel diminished actually applied accurately with his father, yet now was causing him a lot of distress. And the second principle, I think, of working effectively with clients who self-sabotage is maintaining an attitude of support and affirmation towards the client's current strivings for success in their lives. Showing your genuine happiness for the client in their attempts to succeed in their own lives and recognition of the client's strengths can convey that, the client feeling built up does not at all hurt you or make you feel diminished, but actually kind of can even result in an augmented or enhanced experience of for the client and yourself potentially in the therapeutic relationship. And the reason I think these two principles are effective in working with self-sabotage is that they both facilitate creating evidence for the client that the old kind of pathogenic beliefs of something along the lines of, if I succeed, then I will hurt or diminish others, that old logic does not apply in this therapeutic relationship. And as the client learns to expect in the therapeutic relationship that when they achieve success and even allow themselves to be proud of it, that it will be met with affirmation and support, and with the other person, you as the therapist, remaining very much intact in your own self, that those experiences of it being in essence now safe for the client to succeed, it doesn't compromise your sort of connection to them, support of them, or your feelings about yourself. Over time, then that experience gets to be extrapolated into the rest of the client's life and may then hopefully, facilitate a different experience for someone like John at work, where as he, climbs the, say, ladder of the line of work he's in, that, having momentum and success and maintaining it feels a lot safer and even like something that he wants to have happen, as opposed to it feeling like it brings up a kind of nameless dread or danger that, certainly in John's case, was very much there as he succeeded. Well, I hope today's video has been helpful just in thinking about not just, the self in self-sabotage, but sort of the self and the other that self-sabotage often originates from. In that it's really, there's a prominent psychoanalyst, psychotherapy researcher named Lorna Smith Benjamin, and I'm paraphrasing it, but in essence she says something like, every pathogenic belief is a gift of love. And I think that very much applies to self-sabotage, that, in the cases of John and folks like him, it is an attempt to forge a loving relationship with a parent who otherwise is unable to afford the child a loving relationship on that child's own terms. And if that understanding can be brought about in the therapy, and the client can get to know that, it can afford the client a much more compassionate way to understand themselves and why it's been so necessary to kind of sabotage themselves. And I think that also adds to the kind of healing from this survival strategy that folks often come to therapy looking for help with. Well, again, thank you, and I hope you'll check out the ebook on control mastery theory, as I think it'll be really helpful if the kind of principles discussed in our videos appeal to you in your own work as a therapist. Take care.